well, Amy, and how are you? Great. Good. Well, happy St. Patrick's Day, everybody. If you're not Irish, you can be today. We would like to get this meeting rolling. So, first thing we're going to do, I want to welcome, is anyone here who's never been here before? Welcome. Welcome to the Tea Party. This is your group. If you choose to become an unofficial member, we don't have a membership drive. We don't have dues you have to pay, although we do pass the plate, so prepare yourself for that. But if you want to be involved in truly conservative people who are just trying to make a difference in their communities, in their state, and in their country, this is the place for you. We are nonpartisan. We just want to see this country run by constitutional values. That's what we're about. So if that's where you are, welcome aboard. We do have an upcoming candidate forum. It will be at our regular April meeting, and it will be in this room. It's with the state representative candidates, those running for House District 10, thank you. I always want to say SD 22, CD 6, House, I never can remember all these numbers. Jim Pitt's position. And those who are running for Congress against Joe Barton. And we have a candidate who is here. Are there any other candidates that are running for office? Raise your hand. Great, okay. Hopefully toward the end, maybe we'll have time for you to say something about yourselves. If we don't, then just make sure you talk to the people who are here in the audience.
If you don't say something about it that's negative, it's okay. I
won't. At least not while you're here. That's congressional candidate Frank Kuchar. So, but at any rate, I think we're going to lead the meeting off right now with the prayer. Randy, if you'll come up.
You would stand for our invocation. Father, we come to you tonight as your people and ask your blessing on us, the Ellis County Tea Party, and all tea parties across this country. We know that we live in serious times, and it is only through you and the wisdom and strength that you give us that we can win the battles that you have called us to fight. Give each of us the courage and resolve that we need to bring our country back to being God-centered, where what is morally upright is honored. Draw those to our group who you know are destined to be a part, and as a group, let us be a special blessing to our nation, our community, and to one another. We pray also for the peace and protection of Israel, the land of our Savior Jesus Christ, in whose name we pray. Amen. Amen. Amen.
Okay, we're going to do the pledges in just a minute, but real quick, I just wanted to say something on a kind of a personal level. Are you all familiar with Sir Edmund Burke? He is the man who made the statement, "Evil flourishes when good men do nothing." That is what I see our role to be, is to stand up and stop evil from moving and permeating into all of our lives. And I am not going to point my finger at any one person. I think most people are ideologues and believe what they're doing is right. But we as constitutional conservatives have to say, stop, enough. This is not right. This is not where our nation needs to be. So never back down from that challenge. When you see wrong, open your mouth. They can't eat you. Just keep breathing, keep moving forward, and open your mouth when you see things that are wrong. Because most people won't acknowledge it because they don't want to have to deal with it. But we've not dealt with things for way, way too long. Thank you. Bill wants to come up and do the pledges.
I'll do it from here.
Okay.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Now Texas. Honor the Texas flag. I pledge allegiance to thee, Texas, one state under God, one and indivisible.
Y'all are getting good at that.
Okay, I'm just gonna say something. We've got to teach Bill how to slow down and say it like a real Texan. Just say it, Bill. You know we love you. Okay, at this point, Keith Lennon is gonna come up and talk to you about our money.
What little we have.
Well, there you go.
It's their money.
That's right. Your money. This is quarterly thing we do. So since the first of the year, just to let you know, we started the year with $617. Big money for us. We took in $589 between January 1st and today. And we had expenses of $899, leaving us with a grand total of $307. A lot of the expense went to the candidate forum. We took in donations of $192. We had candidate tables of $80, but the Civic Center rental and miscellaneous expenses cost us $547.50. Leaving us at a deficit of $275. So that's where our money's going. We would still like to buy constitutions. We can get 500 of them for about $100. Start handing out that very good thing. And we have another forum coming up. It won't be quite as expensive because we won't be in that other room, but we will probably also run a deficit for that one. So anything you can spare to help us out and allow us to pay for these kind of functions is greatly appreciated. I do have about 10 copies if anybody wants any more detail. I'll have them in the back for you. And if you got any questions about our budget and our expenses, please feel free to ask me at any time. And with that, we've got a full agenda tonight. So I want to introduce Corey Whalen, all the way from Houston. She's with the Alliance for Self-Governance, and she's got a very interesting background, being from Boston, a liberal bastion. I had to get that out. Boston. Got to Texas as quick as she could. So what we're going to do is, a lot of it's going to be question and answer. A lot of what we want to approach is incumbent, and how do we support the opposition to incumbents. So with that, Corey, it's all yours.
First, I think I'm just going to pass these out. These are little case studies we're going to talk about at the end, one each.
And then use the mic.
Thank you.
This is different from this. This is different from this.
Two different pages.
Oh, Linda, do you have that information? That's not something. It's on my flash drive. Yep. And it's on the ASG presentation up on the top left.
Who's going to wear it? Okay, I got this. Thanks.
Great. So I'm going to be pointing at Linda a lot to have her change slides, so if y'all are wondering what I'm doing, that's what I'm doing. So anyway, thank you, Keith. As he mentioned, he blew up my spot. I am originally from Boston. I've been down in Houston for a year and a half, and I am the political director of two organizations that are related. One is the Campaign for Primary Accountability, and the other one is the Alliance for Self-Governance. The Alliance for Self-Governance is more educational-based. Campaign for Primary Accountability is more action-based. The philosophy for both is that we want to hold incumbents accountable by encouraging people to vote in the primary in safe seats where they cannot otherwise be ousted. We work specifically in House races on a federal level, but the same logic applies to state rep races, to any race where there's a primary. And I know we've got a good congressional primary and a really good state rep primary in this area, so I think it very much applies to what y'all are facing. And with that said, we'll go to the next slide. So So I'm not going to spend too much time on this presentation. As Keith mentioned, we do want to do some question and answer type situations, but just give you a quick background about what my organizations are about. We essentially, like I said, are dealing with primaries. And one of the problems is that, as we all know, politicians at this point aren't likely to term limit themselves. You know, it's just the power that they seek. They tend to want to keep it. And one of the ways that we can look at instituting citizen term limits is through the primary process. And one of the problems is that, you know, our politicians just don't seem to have the same moral fiber as a lot of our founders did. You know, George Washington set the precedent as president to only seek 2 terms. And that's not really the same way that people tend to look at politics today. So essentially, the situation we're in now, if you're here, you know things are bad with our government, with our deficits, with really the situation we're in. And Congress teeters on a cliff because they've lost accountability to the people. So, again, accountability is a major problem. These politicians have no competition at all. Therefore, they just allow themselves to run roughshod over the people. So, of course, as I'm sure everyone here knows, our national debt is skyrocketing. It's at over $15 trillion at this point, and fairly recently we passed a point where our national debt is more than our gross domestic product, meaning we spend more as a nation than our entire country produces, and that is unsustainable, and we can no longer continue down that path. And of course, you know, unfunded liabilities make it worse. The situation is not going to get better, and the people have to take a hold and take charge if there are going to be changes in this nation. So our theory with my 2 organizations is that Congress is really to blame. You know, politically, it's very easy to focus on the presidency and say, oh, the president does this, the president does that. But when you look at our constitutional form of government, it's actually Congress that's the foremost branch, and the House specifically controls appropriations. And that's why we're looking at the House. So, frankly, House incumbents simply aren't accountable. In November of 2010, the approval rating of Congress was 17%. It's significantly lower now. Yet, in November of 2010, incumbents were reelected to Congress at a rate of 86%. So as you can see, there's a major disconnect there. And it's almost impossible to fire incumbents. That's the huge problem, is that the system is essentially rigged for them, whether it's through gerrymandering, whether it's through the type of lobbyists and revolving door situations congressmen have. It's very difficult to break through and challenge those people. So again, this is kind of a chart that shows you congressional job approval. It is down to 83, or it's up to 83% of people who disapprove. So like I said, you know, the system is very much rigged for incumbent advantages. You know, money is a huge problem. Contribution limits create a barrier for new challengers, and name recognition is obviously a problem. Incumbents maintain the monopoly because the parties both protect the people that have been in for a long time. And so one of the problems is the longer these incumbents are in office, the more trouble we're in. If you look at this graph, you can see that the length of time that congressmen are in, it correlates directly with federal, state, and local spending as a percentage of our gross domestic product. So their longevity and our problems certainly intertwine, almost exactly. So Americans typically agree this is a dire situation, but the problem isn't so much with the people, it's more the system we're faced with. So how can we change that? So again, you know, Americans are dissatisfied. This is not something that y'all are not aware of, so I won't go into too much of the detail there. And this is a great quote from Thomas Jefferson that I think is really relevant. The way to maintain good and safe government is not to trust it to one, but to divide it among the many. So our idea is the more competition, the more decentralization, the better for the people. So the thing is that largely Americans from across the political spectrum actually believe in the value of self-governance. And only 15% of Americans say they trust the federal government to always do what's right. And 57% of Americans, however, do have confidence in their state government. Nearly 70% have trust in their local government. And 73% of voters nationwide trust the people more than the political leaders. So I think that speaks to decentralization and government being closer to the people as a positive. So here's the thing, Americans aren't being offered any choices. The problem is that general elections are largely fake fights because over 85% of districts are safe seats for one party or the other. So people might vote against their incumbent in the general election, but it does not matter because of the way districts are built. And primaries are not looked at by most voters as being important. You know, people will usually vote either for an R or a D and not necessarily think about it. And primaries are really where you can make the difference because of lower turnout and because that's where you can actually get rid of these bad people. So, next. Like I said, 85% of House districts are controlled by one party. And it's similar on a state level. It's pretty much always a district is made for one party or the other. And the average margin of victory for incumbents in their general election is 26%. And if you look, that graph shows the darker color is where the election is really determined. It's in the primary, not the general. And again, turnout in primary elections is very low. That's one of the things we're going to look at with the case study that Jimmy helped pass out after I'm through with this. What's happening is only 8 to 12% of citizens are really picking who's in Congress because that's usually the turnout in primaries. So again, incumbents really lose primaries. We talked about that. So from 2002 to 2008, only 12 incumbents lost a primary challenge and 13 incumbents died in office. So if you look at the numbers, God recalls incumbents more often than primary voters do. It's true. So we can restore self-governance if we spend more time focusing on primaries and creating competition in that context. So what we're doing through the Campaign for Primary Accountability and the Alliance for Self-Governance is that we're trying to empower Americans to hold these incumbents accountable by increasing primary turnout, by leveling the playing field, by putting some money into the primary to actually compete with these incumbents who have all these monetary and media and name advantages that challengers simply don't have. So definitely it's about leveling the playing field and bringing challengers up and bringing incumbents kind of back down and really mounting a real challenge. And also, we're trying to target long-term incumbents who don't necessarily represent their constituencies. So when we have a situation where someone just does not reflect the demographics of their district at all, we'll look at trying to help some challengers there. So like I said, we've got ASG, we're a 501(c), we have a project called the Primary Pledge. And then, we're trying to reach voters through canvassing in neighborhoods, targeting them through phone and mail, and it's been interesting so far. We did have a victory recently in the Ohio district. I don't know if any of y'all heard, Congresswoman Jean Schmidt was actually beaten by an Iraqi war veteran, a guy who had no political experience. His name is Brad Wenstrup, and we were working in that district, and we helped to, along with the Tea Party in that district, help Brad Wenstrup get a leg up, and he actually defeated Jean Schmidt. So we're really happy about that, and we hope to see that happen more across the nation. And we've had about 150,000 individuals sign the primary pledge. It's been more, since this was made. And so the Campaign for Primary Accountability, this is the organization that, since we may be working in Joe Barton's district. I can't say for sure yet, just because of all the redistricting, we're making that decision very soon, but he has some strong primary challengers, and that's something we like to look at is when there is a serious primary challenge, how can we kind of get in there and help the challengers get their message out? So essentially we're trying to expose incumbents' records when challengers don't have the resources to, because that is always the case, is that people just can't mount that challenge to these entrenched incumbents. So again, we have a mix of field operations, media, etc. I won't go into too much to the details on that. But again, we decided to target based on if they've been in Congress typically for 8 years or more, or in the case of Jean Schmidt, who was elected in 2005, if they're very corrupt. She was named most corrupt by an independent watchdog group, so sometimes if you got someone who's really bad, we'll look at them. They need to be vulnerable according to our polling, and they have to have credible opposition in the primary. And we also obviously like to see, well, who are the grassroots really backing? We don't want to go in and say, oh, this is our favorite candidate. We like to talk to the activists and say, well, who is it that y'all are looking at? And of course, the question is, why not just have term limits? But again, the Congress is not likely to vote that in at this juncture, not with the way they're acting. So we really need to apply the idea of citizen-instituted term limits and low primary turnouts. That's the way to do it. And again, we don't think that Congress is full of evil or stupid people necessarily, but it's self-serving people who are spending our money without accountability. And And that's the problem. They have no challenge, so they don't stay accountable at all. And again, this is state level, and it's federal level too. So our whole thing is, even if we support candidates that don't necessarily win, it is very, very helpful because it shows these congressmen that there are people challenging you, and it does make them, it makes them think. Like earlier, I had dinner with Linda and a few people, and we were talking about how, you know, Jim Pitts, he is getting a little worried, you know, because he has 2 primary challengers. And so regardless of the outcome, you know, he has to come back and talk to the people. And that's something he hasn't done in quite a while. And that's the same with a lot of incumbents. When they have that primary challenge, they have to come back and actually deal with us. And they don't always like to, but they should. And it's good then when we make them. So that was basically the presentation. I want to kind of talk about some of the case studies. This is my information up there. Y'all can feel free to take it down. I have some business cards too, but we'll leave that up there. And then I think everyone should have one of those flyers in front of us. I've done 2 case studies. Obviously Jim Pitts. Who here is in Jim Pitts' district? All of us? Okay, the other one I have is Bobby Vickery's the challenger, but Byron Cook. Is anyone here from Byron Cook's district? No, I made that one for the Palestine Tea Party when I spoke there, but if we could grab the one that has Jim Pitts on it. I put it together to show, on the back side, it shows from the Texas Tribune, all of the percentages of his races since he won, and if you look, it's very, very obvious that, actually, you know what, I didn't bring copies of it myself. Jimmy, were there any extras?
I didn't bring one.
Yeah, I got one right here for you.
Thank you. I'm sitting here talking about it, and I'm like, I don't even have it in front of me. All right. So, again, when you look on the back, you see he's really never had a primary challenge, except for in 2006. And even then, he won with 80% of the vote. And I would imagine it's just because these primary challenges, again, they're not necessarily having the resources to really challenge. Because if you look, in the 2006 general election, Pitts had a Democratic challenger, but he still garnered 67% of the vote. And that was basically the lowest margin he had since initially getting elected. And that's still a pretty safe Republican seat. You know, he's not really going to be beaten by a Democrat. So if you want to get rid of him, you really got to look in the primary. And if you look, the Tea Party really has the power with the numbers that it has and the larger network to actually make a difference in these primaries. Because if you look in the 2006 GOP primary for Pitts, only 9,182 votes were cast, whereas in the general election, 37,712 were cast. That's a huge difference. And the Democrat versus Republican race isn't even a real race. You know, the Republican is going to win. So the lower turnout is happening in the real race, and the Tea Party can harness that in a major, major way and help increase turnout for candidates that go more along with the constitutional view of things. And if you look at the 2006 primary, Burge needed 5,533 more voters to overcome Pitts in the primary. That is a much, much lower margin than what you would need to overcome somebody in the general. So essentially, it's very important to notice that primaries are the opportunity. It's kind of like the back door to the castle. And a lot of times these challengers, you know, can really make a difference and, like I said, hold the elected official accountable or hopefully even defeat them. So when you increase the volume of voters, you can hold them accountable, and that is where the real competition is. And the other case study is just something you can take a look at. It was a similar situation with Byron Cook and Bobby Vickery. And I know Bobby is challenging Byron Cook again, so that could be interesting. It's just good to see these competitions in the primaries overall, and I'm happy to be involved in an organization that is helping, you know, these grassroots candidates really hold these elected officials accountable. When they have a ton of money, it's hard. You know, we were working in Spencer Backus's district in the Alabama primary that happened last week. And Spencer Backus actually spent, I think it was $1.5 million of his own money to win a primary. So that's unprecedented. He won, but he had to spend money that he usually uses to grease the wheels of his other establishment buddies. He had to use it on his primary. You know, he has a leadership PAC called Growth and Prosperity, and typically he gives to other establishment candidates the bailout crew, you know, the DC types, and so he wasn't able to do that as much because he had some incredible challengers. And we hope, to help change the culture in DC with the people.
We have that problem with our incumbent congressman here, and it's good that he has some opposition.
Right.
this time,
Right.
Because what he does is bails out his establishment.
Mhm.
Almost every incumbent,
Of course.
last cycle or the cycle before, and you can look at this, and go look it up at the registrar's office. He's given money to, I think his PAC is called the Texas Freedom PAC. He gave Cindy Polly like $3,000 and she had token opposition. But it's to maintain his network and his goodwill with the incumbents. And basically to manipulate all of us.
They do, it's absolutely true. And actually a really good resource if you're interested in following the money, and I spend so much of my time when I'm working doing this, is a website called opensecrets.org. And if you go there, you can see all of the intertwining money trails that these incumbents use to keep themselves and their buddies well funded. Like I said, it was really interesting looking at Spencer Backus. I'm going to be looking more into Joe Barton, this week as we finalize our decisions for the Texas primary and who we're going to try and help support here. So it's very, very interesting. Unsurprisingly, the people who have been in the longest and the people in leadership positions in Congress are typically the ones that engage in this PAC, revolving door with their, bank buddies. You always look, they have bank PAC is one of the big ones that gives to them, and then they give to their friends. I mean, this is what we're dealing with, and most people don't know it. And we want to help kind of expose these congressmen and say this is what's really going on, and it's at your expense.
One thing I would add is our state representative and our congressman work together. They give to the same candidates.
Mm-hmm.
One time, we have a county judge who was selected basically by Joe Barton, and for better or worse, he gave her $4,000 in the primary for his Texas Freedom Fund. After the primary was over, and y'all can check me, you can go right over to the voter registration office and check this. Then Jim Pitts comes in with $5 grand out of his own money and pays off our campaign debt. So
Right.
That's how it works here.
Right, exactly. And this is why we really want to draw attention to primaries and why we think it's very important for Tea Party activists to be educated on the turnout numbers. Because when you look at the turnout numbers, that's how you can help your candidates mobilize. You can say, okay, this is our exact target number, and you can help craft, whether it's walking, canvassing, phone banks, you look at that and you know your exact number, and it's so much more surmountable an effort when you do it in the primaries, and it's what's going to make a bigger difference at the end of the day, too. So, did anyone have any more questions? Yes, Jimmy?
A lot of these incumbents, Joe, this will be 28 years for him, and Jim will be 20 for him.
Right.
They're not necessarily bad guys.
Right, exactly.
Would you give us a little description of what happens to possibly good guys
Sure.
that are down there once they get in there and been in this long? What happens?
Exactly. Well, I think what happens is they may go in with good intentions, but like I said, there's very much a revolving door culture both in Austin and DC, where once you're in, you want to stay in, and you start losing focus on what it is you came to do because all the moneyed interests start supporting you, and you start feeling more accountable to them than the actual people. Because a lot of times the people aren't paying attention, and that's part of it too. So the people aren't paying attention, but the moneyed interests are, because they're gonna get something from these people. And that just escalates the longer the time period is. You probably remember the chart I showed you, and granted it was for Congress, but it's a similar concept in Austin where the longer they're in, the more they're influenced by the people around them who get something from them. So like I said with Spencer Backus, he's bailing out banks. He was probably one of the biggest architects of the TARP bill besides people, like Hank Paulson and the Treasury Secretary folks. But in Congress, he was one of the main architects. And like I said, guess who's bankrolling him? Bank PAC, Bank of America, all of these organizations that got money. So these people are basically trading favors with our money and their private money that usually came from socializing the losses but privatizing the gains. And that's a huge, huge problem. I consider that corporatism. It's far from capitalism. And so that's what happens. It becomes kind of this corporatist culture and this go along to get along culture, and it just gets worse and worse. Yes, ma'am?
Maybe I missed it, but can you tell me who the Alliance for Self-Governance, what is the group? How did it start? A little bit of history about your group?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a newer organization. It's funded primarily by two men, one by the name of Leo Lindbeck, who is from Houston. His family is in construction, and they kind of have a conservative background. And he got together with a man by the name of Eric O'Keefe, who has been kind of a conservative/libertarian activist. Eric is from Wisconsin. And Eric was involved in the term limits movement in the 90s, but kind of started to realize that wasn't going to work, so this was almost another avenue. So Leo and Eric are the two principal funders of these organizations. In my opinion, they're great guys who are trying to level the playing field. You know, they're both wealthy, but instead of playing on the corporatist side, they're trying to actually level the playing field. So they're the two men who founded this organization. It was founded, I guess I want to say over the last summer, so it's newer. And then the Campaign for Primary Accountability, well, ASG is a C4 organization by its tax designation. And like I said, our focus is on self-governance as an ideal. It's less about policy and more about governance, in that people who have different ideas on how to implement policy can agree often that it might be better to try to localize things. So that's our philosophy. And the Campaign for Primary Accountability is our super PAC. Y'all probably have heard of the newer phenomenon of super PACs, where we're essentially an organization that runs independent expenditure campaigns. We don't give to candidates, but we run independent expenditure campaigns, educating people on the record of congressmen and on the ideas of challengers. And so, like I said, we'll send out mailers, we'll do neighborhood walks, we'll do phone banking, and just general outreach via social media and other mediums, radio, TV, to educate people and level the playing field. So that's our philosophy, and both organizations are newer. The Alliance for Self-Governance is going to stick around. We'll see with Campaign for Primary Accountability after this, this House Congress cycle. We'll see what happens with CPA. But right now, it's running independent expenditure campaigns in our targeted districts. Does that answer your question? Great. Did I see anyone else? Yep.
You talked about block walking and phone banking. What would the message be? I mean, is the message going to be generally a primary opponent, or will be anti-incumbent?
That depends entirely on the district, right? So in the Gene Smith-Brad Wenstrup race, Brad was clearly the challenger. You know, there were two other people running, but they weren't really mounting serious campaigns. So in the instance of the Ohio 2 congressional district, we did, you know, anti-Gene Schmidt things, pro-Brad Wenstrup things. In the Spencer Backus race, it was the same. There was one, you know, specific challenger, Scott Beeson, was kind of the main guy, so we did stuff on behalf of him and against Backus. We also worked in another Alabama district, Joe Bonner. Joe Bonner had 3 challengers, but none of them really were the clear favorite of any grassroots or any, no one was stronger than the other. So in that one, we just focused on educating people on Joe Bonner's record and hoping that educating the people and driving up, you know, the reality of his negatives would push him into a runoff. Unfortunately, that didn't happen. It was a very low turnout primary, which was strange for a presidential year. But it just depends on the district. If we get involved in Joe Barton's race, I'm not entirely sure how we'll do it, but certainly, you know, it depends on if one challenger is kind of the clear favorite. My guess is there's not necessarily a clear favorite in this congressional race, but I'm not able to make a, you know, definite comment on that yet. Yes, ma'am?
If you wanted to get involved in the campaign, now I don't mean really involved, but is there some advice or information you can give to a candidate to help them?
To a candidate? I'm sorry, I didn't understand the last.
To a candidate that's running, like the 2 people that are running against Jim Pitts. Is there anything that you can do to help them?
Well, my organization personally can't, but I would encourage, just on the basis of, you know, being here, that everyone do get involved in helping with primaries on every level. You know, I feel very strongly that primaries are where the race is, and so I would encourage every Tea Party activist. You know, I know a lot of Tea Party groups don't actively endorse candidates, and I understand that, but I think members should pick the, you know, the candidate of their choice and get as involved as they possibly can. So like I said, I did these case studies to show you some of the turnout numbers, and I hope that was helpful. But my organization doesn't work directly in the state races. So.
But I do know people ask you,
yes.
Who is the Tea Party backing? I get that question a lot.
People do, but I think, You know, and I've been a Tea Party activist for, you know, I organized the Boston Tax Day Tea Party in 2009 when I was still in college up there. Yeah, the one in 1773. Yeah, that one. No, but I did in 2009 organize that one. So I understand, you know, I've been in the movement. That's a question that typically can't really be answered, you know.
But you know, we really should.
Yeah, I understand. It's just hard, I think, on a general level to make that kind of statement. But I think some challengers do emerge as kind of clear Tea Party candidates. It's just up to the individual organizations whether they endorse. I know some, for example, in the Gene Schmidt district that I mentioned, the Tea Party there has they called it the Claremont County Liberty Political Action Committee. And it was basically an outfit of the Tea Party, and they endorsed Brad Wenstrup. So I think different Tea Parties have different views on how to do it. I think it helps too. I think it helped Brad Wenstrup, but you know, each Tea Party is different, and that's one of the interesting things about the movement. So, any other questions or comments or anything? I'm always interested to hear how y'all are doing with any races. Is anyone here volunteering actively for any races? That is not enough
Yes, I
people.
think some of us are.
Yes, yes.
I'm actively working for Linda Bounds.
Good, good. Awesome. No, well, that's great. I think that's what needs to be done. And I will certainly be, you know, letting the leadership of this organization know if we do get involved in Joe Barton's district. But, you know, legally, a super PAC can't coordinate it all with campaigns. So we don't actively work with the campaigns. Like I said, we just run independent expenditures on behalf of the challenger or against the incumbent.
Well, I'm very pleased to hear you're in existence.
Well, thank you.
We need someone like you all.
Yeah, we need to, with all the big money out there, it's good to see that some big money people want to actually level the playing field. It's rare. Usually they want to help, you know, enrich themselves at the expense of average people. Yes, ma'am?
Okay, I do have a question. When you've gone out and had the campaign with just kind of anti-incumbent but no real clear challenger and winner?
Yes.
Versus going out and hitting the, you know, really bumping up the challenger,
Yeah.
you are noticing a bigger difference?
Yes.
Which one?
Yeah, that's actually true. In our experience so far, the organization does work in Democratic races as well. I just happen to personally be more interested in the Republican side given my views. But let's see, we've had 4 races so far, 3 Republican races, and I did find that exactly, that when there's a clear challenger to support, that helps. It helps a lot. Because you don't want to, when you just go negative, and sometimes, you know, you do, I hate to say going negative, because it's not going negative to tell the truth about a candidate's, or excuse me, an incumbent's record, but sometimes people are sensitive to that, and it's always better when you have a comparison. You know, a compare and contrast is always ideal, because I think people take to that more on a psychological level, but sometimes strategically, you just have to try and get, you know, the incumbent into a runoff, and then from there you can support, you know, who emerges as the clear challenger, but it's not always possible. Like it wasn't in the Joe Bonner district. All 3 of the challengers were really not that strong. But you're right to say that it works a lot better when there's one strong challenger and all of the grassroots kind of get behind that challenger. So, but it doesn't always happen in every district. It's, you know, it just depends. So.
About 50 years ago here in Texas, you would have had, you know, you would work with some of the Democrats too. Texas, unlike Massachusetts, in Massachusetts you probably have a lot more Democrats up there than you do Republicans.
Oh yeah, absolutely, absolutely.
Texas is right on the other side of the world.
That's true.
I would ask you to remind us when we're finally going to have our primary election here in Texas.
May, oh gosh, 29th, yeah. Oh, I forgot that. I know it's May, yeah, May 29th. I remember it was April 3rd, March 6th.
So we want everyone here to vote in that?
Yes, absolutely. May 29th, you absolutely have to vote. That is, like Jimmy said, this is very much a Republican state, unless a district is specifically drawn for a Democrat, you know, based on Voting Rights Act provisions. It's pretty much Republican districts for the most part in this state, unless you start getting in the Valley area. But these are very, very safe districts for Republicans, especially the ones around here. And so the primary is the battle. But the good news for activists, like I said, is that the lower turnout is a huge advantage to you. Huge. because every vote counts about 10 times more, if not more. So, yes, ma'am.
Yes, and don't wait till May 29th to vote. Everybody needs
Yes,
to
early vote.
early on the first day of early voting, because if you're killed in a car accident on May 28th, you're going to lose your vote.
Yeah, no, that actually is true, but early voting is helpful for candidates because candidates are always working on voter turnout, the last week before the election. So the earlier you vote, the more that helps the candidate because the candidate doesn't have to go call every supporter. If you've already voted, that's very helpful. Yes, sir?
Does everybody know what date the early voting is for the primary? It's the 14th to the 25th.
Yep, he just said it. Yeah, 14th to the 25th.
Of May.
Yep. Oh yeah, and Jimmy said to mention, and this is true, the runoff, if you have any runoffs, and hopefully there will be a runoff in the Barton and Pitts races.
Absolutely.
That'll be July 15th. So runoffs are like the super primary. There's even lower turnout in runoffs. So, if you got a situation where some Tea Party type grassroots candidates are in a runoff, don't forget about that. Don't forget about that at all because the party establishment will try and come in and crush these activists. Oh, I know. Just want to remind everyone.
There was one other thing. At dinner, Harlan was pointing this out. It is so essential that we vote in primaries because we don't want to sit back and let someone else determine who our candidate will be.
Yes.
Right. If we don't vote, we have no say. Then we just get to vote with whomever other people thought would be a good candidate.
Yep.
We need that voice.
Yep.
We need to be able to say, no, this is the candidate we want.
And you need to reach out to, your independent voting friends too. This is something else we were talking about at dinner where a lot of independent voters say, well, I don't want to be labeled as a Republican or I don't want to be labeled as a Democrat. And that's understandable. It's very polarizing. But we're at a very important crossroads in a very dire situation in our country where we need to talk to our independent leaning friends and explain to them, what we've been discussing tonight, that the primary is the real race. And if you've been voting against the incumbent in the general election, it's not even really helping. I mean, like, if you look at this, the Jim Pitts case study, he has had no challengers even in the general election on several occasions. And again, that doesn't even matter because he's going to get reelected anyway. So the big thing is you've got to convince your independent voting friends to vote in the primary. It's more important than any labels. You can always go back and re-register independent. It's fine, but you've got to do it. You've got to do it if you really want to make a difference and get these incumbents out and actually create some accountability.
One more little question. Our founders, some of which were from Massachusetts.
Many of them.
What did they give us as far as this question is about incumbents and turnover in government and what kind of, is this a career thing? What did they give us?
Well, I think the founders never did actively institute term limits, but as I brought up, George Washington was an interesting man who set a really amazing precedent because if you look at the history of it, and I'm a huge history buff, I was telling Keith and Jimmy earlier that I got involved in politics because I'm a huge history buff. And I learned about the Constitution long before they were able to get their hands on me in a Massachusetts public school. And I was like, well, this isn't right. And they started telling me the things that I learned. But no, I think what George Washington did by only going for 2 terms as president set an incredible precedent for kind of the culture of how our politicians are supposed to act because he was a war hero and the people would have accepted him as a king, but he said, no, I'm not going to do that. And it was until FDR was the only president who ended up, serving more terms, but until then, the precedent on the presidential level was set. And I think what Jimmy may have been getting at, or at least what I think, is that our founders saw politicians as statesmen who should go and serve, but also they have their professions at home. And that's kind of the culture that we need to get back to. These men were farmers, they were all sorts of different things. And, this whole career politician culture is something that has grown as government has grown. Because, again, it speaks to the revolving door culture. And if we don't hold them accountable, government's only going to grow and they're only going to get more corrupt. Yes, sir?
I think what our founding fathers intended, that you go out there and you produce a reputation of integrity in the community as a leader in the community before you ever went into
Definitely, that
politics or
too.
even thought about it. not make politics your achievement, but make what you did in your community your
Yes.
achievement first.
Yes, that is a very
Then
good
go
point.
into politics. But now, these people go into politics, that's their achievement.
It's exactly, it's backwards, and you make a very good point. You make a very good point because the culture has changed to, I'm going to go to Washington and bring back the most pork barrel spending or do this and do that, and that's seen as the accomplishment, and that speaks to why we have a $15 trillion debt that's unsustainable. So absolutely we need to change that. And Cindy, cut me off if I'm taking too long.
That's what I'm doing.
Okay.
Is there one last question that she can address, or does everybody feel like you've pretty much gotten the answers you need?
And you can talk to me, and again, my email address is up here, and grab me. I'm happy to continue the conversation. So thank you. Thank you.
I was just going to ask her, I mean, we've talked about the congressional and the state rep race, more on the local level, and of particular interest to me, of course, is the judicial races in Texas, since we still have that right to elect judges in Texas.
Yeah, again, that's not something that I've personally looked into very much, the whole judge situation. Where I'm from in Massachusetts, we do not elect judges, we appoint them, but I prefer the Texas model that creates more accountability. But I think that, it's the same concept. Anytime there's a primary, you need to vote because lower turnout means higher impact for your vote. So it's the same on all levels, in my opinion.
This is just an observation that I make personally. Historically, incumbents tend to be reelected. But in the climate we are currently in, an incumbent cannot sit back on their laurels because some people see a sign that says reelect or an I beside their name on the ballot and they're like, I wouldn't vote for that guy. I don't care if he is Jesus' brother. He's not getting reelected as far as I'm concerned. So incumbency can be a double-edged sword. But people vote by name recognition more than they do actual information that they have obtained about the candidate. So it's just one of those things, and as a judge, it's very difficult to go all over for people to recognize who you are and what you stand for. That's a difficult thing for any. It's a lot easier for the local candidates than it is for someone else, like someone running for an office like you are. So. It's going to be an interesting year this year. I really believe this is going to be a very pivotal year for our electorate to see where we go.
Before we go to the next section, can we take a little break and partake of some of the goodies that have been provided for us? We've got water. How about a bottle of 5 or a 6 or 8 minute break?
Well, we probably can.
Let's just go on. Jimmy, go get yourself something. Come on back. I know it's your glasses.
She is struggling, so we will move on. That's great, Ms. Getzman. I love that. And he listened to you. He doesn't listen to me.
Well, I know he left.
Well, no.
He went to get something to eat.
Well, he just ate, so I don't know what the deal with that is. But okay, the next thing we're moving on. Can y'all hear me here? Am I just talking? I think I just turned it off.
How's that? There we go. And I've always been called a loudmouth. I don't know where that came from. Okay. Excuse me?
Not for me.
The next thing we're going to go to is Linda Dunn is going to come up and she is going to go over what we're going to do this year as far as precinct conventions, the county convention, how this is going to work, and what we've got to do. It is different than it's been in most of our lifetimes. So she's going to come up and do that now. Come on up, Linda. I don't have a quiet voice. Unlike me. I have a teacher voice, so I can. All right. Some of you who were here before this is going to be reviewed because we did have precinct training or precinct convention training. However, since that time, some things have changed because of the redistricting. They said one thing, and then they said another, and then they said something else. So some dates are going to be different, the way things are going are going to be different, in particular with the precinct convention. That's going to be way different than it would normally be. So
pay attention on how we do that. Okay, oh, no, other way. Yeah, there we go. All right, so everyone knows the redistricting, they kind of adopted a plan for right now to get us going for the election, which is going to be May 29th. You've all been told, I know by the Tea Party, because we thought, and you will get new precinct numbers. And we were originally told that you're going to be voting in your new precinct numbers in this election. Well, you're not. So you, for now, have your old precinct number that you will be going.
In the May election, they will vote in their new precinct.
Oh,
At
okay.
the convention, we are going to have our precinct convention.
The way it is, I got you.
The old precinct.
All right, see, so things are changing still. So it's going to be more confusing. So you are still going to go with your new numbers. And if you don't know what those numbers are, we will eventually, we'll have a map here, we're waiting for it, and you'll be able to see where your new precinct number is. Because that's what you're going to be voting in. A lot of people have no clue what they are. So that's what we're here to help. So when you find out what yours is, then you can tell your neighbors too.
Dan, aren't the new voting certificates going to be mailed out about April 25th?
April 25th is the deadline. They'll be probably mailed out before then, but that is the deadline when they have to have mailed.
Okay.
So we should have the new voter certificates prior to the May 29th primary vote.
Okay, and so if you get that certificate in the mail, some people are probably going to get that certificate and look at the number and go, no, they must be wrong, because they don't even know they have a new district. Because you know, a lot of people really don't know how it works, so they probably might even be wondering what that card is for. So please still be telling your neighbors that they are going to be changing, so when they get that card, they know what it's for and why it changed. It had to do with your districting. Go ahead.
So for the primary, we're voting in the new precinct
Yes.
or the old precinct?
The new. The new. Okay?
Also, you can't take for granted that when you, because they renumbered all the precincts, just because you're 103 last time, doesn't mean you're going to be in 103 this next time.
No, because see, I'm 104 in the old ones, and I'm 146 now. So some have stayed, but only a couple of them stayed the same. Mine changed. All right, Texas primary, we're not wondering about that anymore. That's the 29th. Go ahead. All right. Usually, what happens for the precinct convention, now this isn't a redistricting year. Earlier, usually the precinct convention happens after you've already voted in the primary. It happens that same night. So this is where everything is different as far as your precinct convention. This year, the precinct convention is going to be held April 14th, Saturday, April 14th, here at the convention.